Let's discuss how to collect user information and apply it throughout Jamf Pro. Hi everyone, I'm William Smith, a Partner Program Manager here at Jamf. One of my responsibilities is to help teach our partners how to deliver services to our customers. I don't do it much anymore, but I love teaching new Jamf customers how to use Jamf Pro. I knew when I walked into the customer's office for that 2 days of training that I'd be showing them something really cool. Maybe something that would change their lives. I was going to teach them how to use Jamf Pro. It's like learning how to drive a car, I'd say. The more you practice, the better you get. Sometimes there'd be a little apprehension, a little skepticism, maybe even some feelings of being overwhelmed, but they placed their trust in me. Now, I'll admit at times things got a little concerning. No, stop clicking things before I tell you. I really need you to look over here to see what's happening. You're okay. No, this isn't going to affect your users yet. We haven't enrolled their computers. Eventually, though, my customers would start to get the hang of it. It might be a little choppy at first, but hey, they were moving forward. Then, after some more time, some more practice, and maybe a good night's sleep, we weren't spinning donuts in the parking lot yet, but we were making things happen and even having a good time. My customers could see what Jamf Pro could do for them. It was glorious. And by the end of our time together, I'd leave them, hopefully, with a feeling of accomplishment and a sense of direction. They were on their own now to explore what they could do and realize some of their dreams of Mac management. Learning Jamf Pro is a journey, one that I've had the privilege of helping many administrators begin. Now, I'm ready to revisit with my customers. And I want to go here. By now, many of you are well into your management journey with Jamf Pro and you've had time to learn your way around. What I'd like to do today is take a deep dive into a single subject that I think will move you forward into doing Hollywood stunts with Jamf Pro. Our new journey starts by asking this question: what's in a username? For us and our end users, our entire computer experience begins with logging in with a username. A username uniquely identifies a person. It might be in the format of first initial plus last name, like this one. An administrator might add a sequential number if someone else has that name. It could be first name dot last name, a combination of letters and numbers like a student ID, or in the case of multiple domains, it might be a user principal name where the name plus the domain makes a unique username. The key is that it's unique for each user. Because it's unique for each user, we can rely on that to identify a specific user in a database of users and ask for more information. For example, a user may log in as M. Moose, but a quick lookup in that database lets us get the full name to display in the Apple menu on the left. That automatically happens on Mac OS if we bind to Active Directory, for example. However, with some additional work, I can not only get the full name, but also the email address to populate Office 365 settings in Microsoft Outlook for Mac or Apple Mail on iPad. Or maybe instead of looking up information to populate fields in applications, we use it instead for scoping age or grade appropriate apps to student iPads. That's our focus for this session. Now that we have an idea of what we can accomplish, where do we go from here? First, how do we even get a username and what do we do with it once we have it? I'll cover several ways. Second, we need a directory service of some type integrated with Jamf Pro that holds user information. It's this connection that helps us get more information once we have a username. Next, Jamf Pro may not natively look up all the information we need from our directory service, so how do we get more? It's pretty easy with extension attributes. And once we have all that information we need, how do we use it? The most common ways are configuration profiles and scripts. I'll show you how to plug in user information automatically without having to hard code user data. Finally, I'll discuss adding user information to reports and quickly call out a little used feature where you can send emails to your end users whose devices fall into certain groups and searches. Let's get started. Before we look into getting usernames, we first need to know what we're going to do with them. This is Martin's computer record in Jamf Pro, where I can view hardware information, applications, and other inventory data. In the user and location section of the inventory, I'm specifically looking at this field, username. Now, I'm going to show you a computer record, but there's a similar section for mobile devices like iPhones and iPads too. When we enroll computers and mobile devices, this field is empty. We have to tell Jamf Pro who this computer belongs to. I could click the Edit button and manually enter the username into the field, but when we're managing dozens, hundreds, or thousands of computers, that doesn't scale very well at all. So let's look at a few ways we can automate putting a username in that field. It takes a little bit of configuration, but an enrollment customization will capture the username and populate that username in Jamf Pro while proceeding through the setup assistant. This requires macOS Catalina or iOS iPadOS 13 or later. And it requires you have some sort of directory service integrated with your Jamf Pro server. That could be Active Directory or an identity provider such as Okta or Azure. You'll first go into your Jamf Pro settings and under the Global Management section, create a new enrollment customization. Here's what the settings for the new pane might look like. If I were using Active Directory, I'd choose LDAP authentication instead of single sign-on authentication. When I'm done, I'd save my configuration. Now, how do I use this new customization? Here, I'm showing you my pre-stage enrollment for all of my computers. Remember, the pre-stage enrollment controls what happens during the setup assistant when you're first enrolling your computer or your iPhone or iPad. In the general settings of my pre-stage section enrollment, there's a setting called Enrollment Customization Configuration. By default, this is set to none. All I need to do is choose the name of the enrollment customization I just created and then save my pre-stage enrollment. That's it. When I power on a brand new or freshly installed macOS or iOS device, it'll come to the remote management window. And when I click Continue, my enrollment customization appears where I'm asked to authenticate to my directory service. I cannot skip this step. As soon as I authenticate, the setup assistant sends Jamf Pro my username and populates the username field in my computer or device record. All right, let's talk about another way we can get a username into Jamf Pro. We can have the end user literally fill in the blank with a dep notify window. Dep notify is an app plus a script that's intended to run just after the first user has logged into the Mac. And it's Mac only, by the way. You need to customize the script a little, but it doesn't require knowing how to script to do that. So this solution is great for most any administrator. You'd add the script and the dep notify installer package to Jamf Pro, and then create a policy that runs at enrollment complete to run the app. The end user then clicks the Register Your Mac button to open a window that can prompt for most any piece of information you'd like to get. The script calls the Jamf command line tool, which we'll talk about next. And then it'll update the inventory and submit that to Jamf Pro. Dep Notify, by the way, is a great app for displaying status updates to your end users while the Mac actually installs its software. It's highly customizable. I encourage you to check it out. I'll have a link to all of these resources at the end of the presentation. I mentioned that when dep notify starter script finishes, it calls the Jamf binary or the Jamf command line tool. On any enrolled Mac, you can submit inventory to Jamf Pro immediately by running sudo jamf recon. Again, iOS is not supported. But if I add some arguments to the end of that command, I can include additional custom information for several of the username fields in my computer record in Jamf Pro. The one I want is the -end username argument, where I can submit Martin's M. Moose username. In the terminal app, I'd enter sudo jamf recon followed by dash and username mmoose. Here's that command from the terminal window where it's just a little bit more readable. But where did the username mmoose come from? Well, I had to type it, which isn't very efficient. If I were simply going to type every username, I might as well do that directly in Jamf Pro. With a little bit of scripting, we can get the name of whoever's logged in. Keep in mind that the name that we get here must match a username in our directories database, which I'll talk about in just a little bit. So this may or may not be a reliable way to get the username. Lastly, if you already have a list of your devices and know ahead of time who's getting which serial number, you might be interested in using Jamf Pro's inventory preload feature. This is available for all macOS and iOS iPadOS devices. In the Global Management section of Jamf Pro, you'll find Inventory Preload. You can download the CSV template from there. You'll populate as much information as you'd like, but I suggest just the serial number, device type, and username. And then this information updates the device record with every inventory. Then upload the completed CSV back to Jamf Pro, and you're done. As new devices with matching serial numbers get enrolled, the username is automatically populated. And from there, Jamf Pro will pull in additional information from your directory service, which we'll talk about next. The secret with usernames is to devise ways to get them automatically through the devices where the end users identify themselves to Jamf Pro. Or if you have granular control over which of your end users get which devices, you yourself can populate the username data. Also, all right, that's a big deal. We've captured a username. Now what? Here's where you tie into a directory service to look up that username and pull more information into Jamf Pro. Let's go back to our computer record in Jamf Pro. This is what we have. This is what we're after. More information like the end user's first name and last name, email address, position, department. I worked with an airline that replaced the pilot's briefcases of flight manuals with iPads. It also replaced the flight attendant's credit card readers with iPads and its ground crew's technical manuals with iPads. Each person enrolled his or her iPad and was required to authenticate during enrollment, as we saw earlier. The Jamf Pro then reached out to Active Directory to pull in their job titles, and from there, a smart device group of pilots received their flight manuals and fuel calculators. Flight attendants received their point-of-sale ground messaging apps, and maintenance crews received their technical documentation and forms. Directory services integrate directly with your Jamf Pro server. At no point do your devices ever communicate with your directory servers, nor do they even need to be on the same network. The most common directory service in organizations today is Active Directory. It supports LDAP, which stands for Lightweight Directory Access Protocol. LDAP is a workhorse of a protocol and a standard. It's been around almost 30 years. Specific to Jamf Pro and our needs, an LDAP service like Active Directory does two things for us. It acts as a central authority to authenticate users and devices and allow them access to network resources like file shares, printers, and websites. The other thing it does is it serves information about the objects in its database. This is where user information like email addresses and departments come from. To configure Active Directory or any other LDAP server, you'll need to add it to your Jamf Pro settings under LDAP servers. By the way, with some additional software that Jamf provides for free, your Jamf Cloud servers can connect to your on-prem LDAP servers. But wait, there's more. Jamf Pro connects to several identity providers for directory services as well. So what's an identity provider? Simply put, it's a directory service, but in the cloud. And since Jamf Cloud is in the cloud, it needs no special software to connect. It works over the internet. If your Jamf Pro server is on-prem, it just needs to be able to access the internet through your firewalls. 3 major IDPs that Jamf supports are Azure, Google, and Okta. These are all configured in Jamf Pro settings. Now, there is one more thing I want to make sure you know about. Directory lookups don't automatically work without it. In Jamf Pro settings, I've moved to the Computers Management section and I've selected Inventory Collection. I need to make sure Collect User Information and Location from LDAP is selected. What does this do? Every time a Mac submits inventory, which is once a week by default, Jamf Pro will perform a username lookup against the directory service. This way, Jamf keeps its user data up to date in case of name changes or maybe a department change. The same applies for iOS devices too. I need to enable Collect User and Location Information from LDAP if I want to automatically look up user information for iPhones and iPads. There are too many directory services to cover how to integrate them with Jamf Pro, but Jamf has extensive documentation online, as well as some of those identity providers. Reach out to your customer success specialist if you need any assistance. Okay, now that we've started collecting usernames and populating the username fields for each of our devices, and now that we've connected one of many available directory services and enabled automatic lookups, let's look into just what information we can pull over and use. Extension attributes are a simple way to expand the Jamf Pro database to hold more than its default fields. For example, Jamf Pro has no built-in field for a student's graduation year, like 2025. So a school might create an extension attribute to add a field, and we can pull the student's graduation year from that directory service and put it into that field. If we know the student's graduation year, we know the student's grade level. Students graduating in 2025 are 9th graders this school year. If we know the grade level, we can create a smart group of all 9th graders, and then we can scope the smart group to appropriate apps, books, and management settings. Let's talk a minute about how we create an extension attribute. I'll try to show you some examples you might find interesting. In my Jamf Pro settings, I've selected Computer Management, Extension Attributes, and I've started a new extension attribute. I'm going to use this extension attribute to pull something called a user principal name from Active Directory. Let's scroll this page up a little so we can see all the fields. I'm going to quickly put in my settings for user principal name, or UPN. Look at the information I'm putting into the fields now. UPNs look like email addresses, but they're actually another type of username. Quite often, we need them to get to log into services like Office 365. I have all of my settings for user principal name populated here, but I want to call out a few things. Because a user principal name identifies a user, I'm going to choose user and location for my inventory display. I think it makes sense to keep all of my user information in that one place. I've set my input type to LDAP attribute mapping. I can only choose this if I've already integrated supported LDAP directory service, so you need to configure that first. Finally, I've set the LDAP attribute to user principal name, formatted the way you see here. The LDAP attribute is what my directory service calls the user principal name field. If we were pulling in the user's full name, the attribute might be named something like real name or full name. If I were pulling in just the last name of the user, it might be SN, all lowercase, for surname. Only a directory service can tell you what the correct attribute names are. Fortunately, for something like Active Directory, those are very well documented. When I click Save, something new shows up. It's a little bit difficult to see, but just under the LDAP attribute field, a new LDAP attribute variable appeared here automatically. What's this for? I'll show you in just a little bit when we discuss configuration profiles. But first, I wanted to show you where the extension attribute shows up. I'm back in my computer record, and again, I'm viewing user and location. Remember, that's where I told the extension attribute that I wanted it to appear. Here are my default user properties, and if I scroll up, this is where my extension attribute shows up, along with a couple more that I made earlier. Warning, these will be blank until your computer updates its inventory with Jamf Pro. If you remember that setting I showed you earlier about collecting user location from LDAP, that we enabled earlier for both computers and devices, it says it only collects that information when updating inventory. If you want to test this right away, use the sudo jamf recon command that I showed you earlier in Terminal on your test Mac. When that's finished running, come back to the Jamf Pro and refresh your page. So, what are these other extension attributes I've created? Remember, these can be anything that you choose, like a student's graduation year. Sometimes the SAM account name is the same as the username, and sometimes it's not. It's usually the SAM account name that I need to use for connecting to file shares on the network. And the user distinguished name can be really handy for those organizations that like to manage devices by organizational unit, or OU, instead of user groups. The distinguished name for a user is the full path to the user object in the directory, and it includes those OU names. You can then create smart groups where the distinguished name contains one or more of those OU names, and then scope that to policies, profiles, or apps. And don't forget, everything I've shown you about computer extension attributes is available for iOS and iPad OS devices too. Okay, so now that we've pulled in all the information we want from our directory service, what can we do with it? Here's where all of our work collecting usernames and looking up user information pays off. Let's talk about configuration profile payload variables. That's a mouthful. I pulled this table from the Jamf Pro Admin Guide online. It's actually longer than what I'm showing you here. This is a list of payload variables that I can use in configuration profiles. A payload variable is a placeholder that I can add to a configuration profile where Jamf Pro can then swap in real information later. Let's look at all the variables side by side with the computer record that we've been viewing all this time. Effectively, if I fill in the value in a configuration profile with $computer name, Jamf Pro will substitute that variable with the real computer name for my computer record when it sends that profile down to my Mac. Here, if I use the $username variable in a configuration profile, Jamf Pro will substitute it with mmoose, or whatever the username is for that computer record when it sends the profile down to my Mac. The same thing happens when I use $full name or $real name. It'll substitute the user's full name, Martin Moose. And anywhere I use $email, Jamf Pro swaps my user's email address into the configuration profile. Email is a great example of where we can see this in action. Let's configure our Macs for Office 365. To start, on my own Mac, I'm going to open the Terminal application and I'm going to run these 4 commands. The first command creates a Microsoft Outlook plist file on my desktop, and it's setting the value of the default email address or domain key to that $email payload variable. Note $email is in single quotes, not in double quotes, because I want my shell to treat this as a string exactly the way I see it and not try to substitute real information for the variable. The second command creates a Microsoft Office plist on my desktop, and it's setting the value of the Office activation email address to $extension attribute _4. Here's where I plug in that variable that I saw after saving my extension attribute for user principal name. And by the way, user principal names and email addresses usually match, which means I could have used $email here too. The third command is telling Microsoft Office to automatically sign in with the email address I'm providing. And the last is making those two files plain text so that I can open them in a text editor and I can copy their contents. Now back in Jamf Pro, I'm going to create a new configuration profile called Office 365 Activation and Outlook Setup. I'm going to add the application and custom settings payload and then choose the upload option. Then I'll click the add button a couple of times. I'll set the preference domain to com.microsoft.office and paste in the text from that first plist that I created on my desktop. If you look closely, you'll see the $extension attribute for payload variable in the plist. And for the second payload, I'll set the preference domain to com.microsoft.outlook and paste in the text from that Outlook plist that I created on my desktop. Again, you'll see the $email variable here too. Now, I've deployed my configuration profile to my Mac that's assigned to Martin, and look what's happened in the settings I see in the Profiles pane. Where my profile had $email, Jamf Pro has replaced that variable with Martin's email address from the computer record. The same thing happened with the user principal name. And when I open Outlook for the first time on my Mac, we're prompted to first activate Office 365, our license. Let's click Get Started. Then I see Martin's username, which is the same as his email address, is automatically filled out from my configuration profile. All he needs to do is enter his password and click Sign In. Finally, Outlook opens and Martin receives his first email. This was automatic configuration from just a username with an LDAP lookup, extension attribute, and a configuration profile. And let's say instead of an application, we start to send information down to our Macs for scripts. Here's a neat little trick. I can put any user information I want into my own custom configuration profile. I'm calling mine net.talkingmoose.userinfo, but you could call yours whatever you would like. I'm using the same defaults command as before, and in it, I'm adding a bunch of things like department, distinguished name, full name, SAM account name, and even more. It creates a plist that looks like this. And when Jamf Pro sends that information to my Macs, all those variables get replaced with user information. And if you weren't aware of it, you'll find your configuration profiles in the top level library folder under Manage Preferences as plists. And in our scripts, we can use that same defaults command to read those plists and get whatever piece of information that we would like. This script reads the full name key from my plist, and it returns Martin's full name. Then it displays a dialog to Martin using his name. With scripts, the possibilities for customization are endless. So from beginning to end, we've seen how we can collect usernames and populate them into Jamf Pro, then look up more information about each user and add that to configuration profiles to manage applications or provide information for scripts. I do want to quickly show two more features at Jamf Pro that many administrators don't take advantage of. And that's reporting on devices and including user information in those reports or sending emails directly to our end users. Let's say we have an advanced computer or advanced mobile device search configured to report on devices that haven't checked in with Jamf Pro in a month. They're missing. My advanced search here is named accordingly. And I have one criterion, and that is to find all Macs that haven't checked in with Jamf Pro in more than 30 days. Under the Display tab is a row of more tabs. And here we can add user information to our report, as well as any user information collected by extension attributes. What I like to do with this is to configure the Reports tab of my search to send an email to a ticketing system with a CSV attachment that includes the names of the owners of the devices that are missing. The ticketing system can then assign someone to review the CSV file and reach out to each of those users to remediate why those Macs aren't reporting. And don't forget, this works for iOS mobile devices too. Or the Jamf Pro administrator could instead view the report and click the action button. One of the actions we can take is to send an email. The Jamf Pro server will send the same message to each of the email addresses associated with the devices. Be aware that you cannot customize these emails to include computer or user information. So sending a report and having a human being able to analyze the report is probably the better way to remediate missing Macs. And with that, we've completed the full workflow of collecting user information and applying it in various ways throughout Jamf Pro from beginning to end. We need to start with a unique username, and the best way to get that username is when a device enrolls into Jamf Pro, or using a tool that will prompt the end user to enter his or her name. From there, we use that unique username to collect more information from a directory service, and then we use configuration, profiles, scripts, and reports to repurpose that information. I appreciate you joining today and hope you got something valuable that you can use. I've posted all of the examples from this presentation to the session downloads area of this presentation. Again, I'm William Smith, and you can find me on Jamf Nation at Talking Moose. Have a great JNUG.